All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. First, I want to take the opportunity, although for the last little bit we weren't doing Shara B'tachon here before Shir, but Mazel Tov to those who finished Shara B'tachon and Chovos HaLevavos just yesterday. It was for many of us the first time learning this sefer in a deep and comprehensive way, and I think it was an incredibly rewarding and meaningful experience for so many of us. Today we are, Mirza Hashem, beginning Pirkei Avos with the parish of Rabbi Yonah. Actually, the first shir was posted already. So again, we are not going to be doing that before shir. Before shir, we're either going to go back to Tzidkas HaTzadik, Emir Hashem, to finish up, or the truth is, there's another beautiful sefer called Bilvavi Mishkan Efna, which Emir Hashem we may start. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different at 5:45 in the morning, but I got a lot of pressure from the Hachzik people to continue doing Pirkei Avos. So Emir Hashem, we're going to continue doing Pirkei Avos. So again, there's a separate WhatsApp chat for that, which I think many of you know about. If you want to sign up on it, again, I posted the link in the Daf Yomi chat as well. And it's on the podcast, Baruch Hashem. So just a wonderful, wonderful limud, making the most of Pirkei Avos Emir Hashem in the remaining summer months. I think it ends in about 2 months, 3 months, something like that. Yeah, okay, whatever it is. Anyway, so I will say, so Mazel Tov on that incredible accomplishment. Begin by thanking our sponsors for today to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Joshua this month as a zechus for the refuah shalema of Kathy's sister, Dana Baker Matson. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, she, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, will have a complete and enduring refuah. But with that, let us begin with a lot to do today. Really great daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is daf Ches 8. We are picking up on Zayin Amud Beis 7b, and we are picking up Tana, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines from the bottom. So Tana Chada. So ultimately again we have one brisa that says Hamevi get bisvina kamevi be'eretz Yisrael. Well, it's an interesting case. What happens if you bring a get on a boat? You bring a get on a boat. Now Rashi explains over here. If you look at Rashi I will say is it's the first of the short lines that are not in line with the rest of the lines. If you notice that, if that makes sense. Hamevi get besvina, shenichtav besvina, the benaros eretz Yisrael ka'amar. Shabbos says, so what happens? This is like a get cruise, right? So you sign up for the get cruise, right? It was a good deal. It was a good deal, right? So single occupancy. Right? So what happens? So you're riding a get on a boat. And the boat is traveling on the rivers of Eretz Yisrael. That's the assumption right now, that it's rivers of Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, so the shaila is, what's the shaila? So is this considered to be a get written in Eretz Yisrael, or is this a get written in Medinas Hayam? Right? Is it written in Eretz Yisrael or overseas? What's the nafkamina? B'fanei nechtam. Good. So the Gemara says, so one brisa says, Hamevi get besina kamevi be'eretz Yisrael. So one brisa says that if you bring a get on a boat, ultimately, again, in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, that is the equivalent of bringing a get in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, Allah Lamaisa, you don't have to say Farnet to find Echtav. The Gemara V'tayin Idach, another brisa says, Kimevi b'chutz la'aretz. No, that a get written on a boat in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, ultimately, again, has the status of a chutz la'aretz get. Okay? So we'll say two competing brises. I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah Kasha. It's not a contradiction. Harav Yehuda, Harabanan. It's two different opinions. We'll say, listen to this. This is not a very interesting case. Afar chutz la'aretz haba b'svina la'aretz. So we'll say, what happens? Listen to this case. If you bring dirt from chutz la'aretz to Eretz Yisrael in a boat, so what's the halacha? Chayiv b'maiser u'b'shviyas. It is chayiv on maiser and in shviyas. In other words, we'll say, so any produce that grows in that dirt, once the dirt arrives in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, has the status of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, again, the produce will be chayiv and shumas and maisros. Rabbi Yehuda, this is 1 second. That's only true. Bisman emasai. When is that true? Bisman shasvina goshashas. That's only when the boat, we'll say goshashas means that the boat is hitting up against the riverbed. Right, the riverbed. Goshashas, right, that it's running up against dry land. Aval inasvina goshashas. But if the boat ultimately is not running up against dry land, pater. ultimately, again, the produce that grows in that soil is pater. So we'll say, so what's the machlokes over here? The Rabbanon hold that once you're in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, that's Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, again, the dirt that was transported from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael is now Eretz Yisrael dirt. It's now Eretz Yisrael dirt. We'll see the svara. We'll see the svara. So we'll say, so that's what they hold. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, that's called Eretz Yisrael dirt. That's called Eretz Yisrael dirt. So the Gemara says, did I not turn it on? Okay, thank you. So I'll say that's called, thank you. That's called Eretz Yisrael dirt. Right? So the Rabbi Huda, on the other hand, holds that halacha l'maisa, no. Water is not called Eretz Yisrael. What's called Eretz Yisrael? Land. So if you're in the boat, as long as the boat runs up against dry land, that is going to be absolutely fine. Good. So the Gemara says as follows. So I'll say that's the reconciliation of the two brises. The original Gemara says, good. Abaye Amar, Havaha Rabbi Huda. The truth is, both prices could be Rabbi Huda. So the Gemara Velo Kasha, Kan Bizman Shenasina Gosheshes, Kan Bizman Shenasina Gosheshes. It could be Rabbosai that Allah Chalamaysa we discount the view of the Rabbanon. And being in the waters of Eretz Yisrael is not like being in Eretz Yisrael. It's not like being in Eretz Yisrael, right? Rather against the brisa that says that riding a get on a boat in the water is like riding it in Eretz Yisrael. That's when the boat essentially again has, is running up. What's the word? There's a word for it. Not dat. Gosheshes means it's hitting against the riverbed. But not grounded, that it's like embedded. Okay, hitting against the riverbed. I thought that there was, I was going to say like running ashore, but that's not the imagery. In other words, it's not the pshat that like the boat is washing up on the shore. This is like when the boat is in shallow enough water that essentially it's hitting the ground. Okay, whatever. Right? It's hitting the ground. So therefore, what the Gemara wants to suggest. So remember, we wanted to see maybe the price reflects the two prices reflect two opinions. Rabbi Huda and the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon are of the opinion that as long as a boat is in waters of Eretz Yisrael, then ultimately, again, that is enough. That is enough. We'll see what the logic of that is. Rabbi Huda, on the other hand, holds that halacha l'maisa, it has to be hitting the ground. The Gemara then says, no, maybe the two prices both reflect Rabbi Huda. The brisa that says that when you write a get in a boat in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, it's like Eretz Yisrael, that's gosheshes. That's right. We'll say gosheshes is like davar gush, like a thing, right? That's running against the ground. Running against the ground. The brisa that says that writing a get on a boat in Eretz Yisrael is not like Eretz Yisrael. That's ultimately, again, when it's not hitting against the ground. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Amar B'Zera, was another interesting case that's an application of this previous machlokes as well. Otzitz nakuv hamunach agabi yesedos. So we'll say this is great. What happens if you have a perforated pot? So if you can imagine, you have soil in a pot. And now what happens? The pot is sitting on a stand. Just have to imagine, sitting on a stand. There are perforations on the bottom of the pot. So now the Gemara says, listen to this. We have now, will effectively be the same machlokes Rabbi Huda and the Rabbanon. How so? Say, watch this. Look at the last Rashi in the daf. L'Rabbanon, avira kiman deman chodami. We also remember again, what do the Rabbanon hold? Let's take a step back. What do the Rabbanon hold? If you transport dirt from Eretz Yisrael, from Chutz La'aretz, you bring it to Eretz Yisrael, right now you're in the territorial waters of Eretz Yisrael. Produce grows in that dirt. According to the Rabbanon, what's the halacha? Chayiv in Shumas Maisrus. Why? Because the Rabbanon hold once you're in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, you're in Eretz Yisrael. What do you see according to the Rabbanon? That to be in Eretz Yisrael, or to be part of Eretz Yisrael, you do not have to be situated on the ground, on the earth of Eretz Yisrael. You just have to even be within the airspace of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, again, the water is within the airspace of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, an atzitz nakov, a perforated flower pot, that is produce that grows in it, is considered to go ahead and get its nourishment from the earth. It's just like it's sitting on the ground itself. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, chayiv in whatever Shumas Maisrus. The Gemara says, conversely, Rashi says, Rabbi Huda, lo mechayiv b'maisr midaraisa ad deman cha'ar. So what did Rabbi Huda say? Rabbi Huda said, if you write a get on a boat, or for that matter, if you bring earth from Chutz La'aretz and you plant produce in it, the only time that produce is chayiv and shumas and maisrus, or the get is considered to be in Eretz Yisrael is when? gosheshas. That's the word to always remember, gosheshas. It's running aground. It's running aground. It's hitting the ground. So Rabbi Yehuda would hold that a perforated flower pot, ultimately again, that would not be chayiv, that which grows in it would not be chayiv in Trumas and Maasros. To which the Gemara says, by the way, Amar Rava Dilma Lohi. No. Leave that aside. The truth is, you cannot necessarily apply the previous machloksim to this one. How so? Ad kan lokram Yehuda hasam ela b'svina ha'asuy livroach top of ches. Aval otzitz she'ena asuy livroach lo. So we'll say, listen to this. Rabbi Yehuda would say like this. Rabbi Yehuda would say, the reason why I feel that ultimately, again, that the boat needs to kind of hit up against land is because a boat, by definition, is mobile. So because it's mobile, until it hits up against land, gosheshes, it can't be considered to be in Eretz Yisrael. But a otzitz, right? But the flower pot, which essentially is stationary, maybe even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that as long as it's perforated, it's considered as if it's sitting on the ground itself, and therefore any produce which grows within it, ultimately again should be chayiv. Take a look. Right, fine. So anyways, inami, the other possibility is ad kalukam rabbanon hasam ela b'sina de lo mafsik avira demaya ki ara smichta damya. Rabbi say, let's take a step back for just a moment. What was the svara of the Rabbanon? Ultimately, again, to say that either a get written in a boat, right, in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, is like it's written in Eretz Yisrael, or for that matter, again, earth transported from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, and something now it's in the waters of Eretz Yisrael, something grows in it, that it should be chayv like Eretz Yisrael produce. What's the logic? That water is like aras smichta. We'll say, what is water? This is interesting. What is water? Water is land. I know. Only Jews could say such a thing like that, right? Well, what's water? Water is land. In other words, water is considered to be like thick earth. In other words, you have the riverbed, and we view the water just as like thick earth extending all the way up. So there's a direct connection to the earth of Eretz Yisrael. However, aval otzitz the mafsik avira lo. But I will say, but a perforated flower pot, right? The perforated pot. I keep saying flower pot. It doesn't have to be a flower pot. Perforated pot. Ultimately, again, where there is clearly a division, right? Ultimately, again, there's the earth down here and there's the flower pot up here. Maybe the Rabbanon would not agree and to say that the flower pot is as if it's at rest on the earth. Therefore, we'll say, so bottom line, what the Gemara just says, what Rabbi just says is, don't link the cases. Cases are not necessarily linked at all. So we'll say, bottom line, what we are left with, ultimately, again, is the case of the get being written in the boat in Eretz Yisrael. So I'll say, so I just mentioned, both the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam pass in the same way, that if you have a get being written in a boat in Eretz Yisrael, the only time that get is considered to be an Eretz Yisrael get is like Rabbi Yehuda, namely Gosheshas. Right? The boat, again, I will say, it doesn't have to be the meaning that the boat is run aground, but rather what it means is the boat is at least in shallow enough waters where it's coming in contact with the ground. So there has to be contact between the boat and the actual earth of Eretz Yisrael for that get to be considered an Eretz Yisrael get. That's how we paskin. Good. I'm sorry?
Does the anchor count?
No, it sounds like the boat itself has to actually be running aground. Okay, so let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. But I will say, I know, Emir Hashem, to actually, tomorrow, Emir Hashem, we get to a new Mishnah. So Emir Hashem, we're going to use that stop at the Mishnah to catch up on all of our halacha l'maisa that we have to do. Specifically, again, focusing on the halachos of when do I need b'fanei nechta. So just, I haven't forgotten about that. Emir Hashem, I know it's been a little while since we've done a Rambam. We're going to get into that tomorrow. Good, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Benaros Eretz Yisrael Kuli Ama Lo Pligi. Supposed to listen to this. So let's take a step back. When talking about the rivers of Eretz Yisrael, everyone agrees that the rivers are Eretz Yisrael itself. In other words, I will say, for example, right? If you have a boat on the Yarkon River, right in Eretz Yisrael, right by Tel Aviv, right? You go on the Yarkon River. So we'll say, so everyone agrees. Of course, that's Eretz Yisrael. And as we'll say, why is that Eretz Yisrael? It's landlocked. In other words, this, just to be clear, what Rav Nachman wants to say is, this is not a din in water. It's not a din in water. So, for example, if you have a river that ultimately clearly is within the territorial borders of Eretz Yisrael, everyone will agree that if you go on you go on a riverboat to write a get, right? That is certainly an Eretz Yisrael get. Right? That's not the machlokes. We'll say, watch this. So what is the machlokes? Alki pligi biyam agadol. We'll say, what's the machlokes? Writing a get where? On the Mediterranean. That's going to be the machlokes. So the Gemara says, so listen to this. Keep biyam agadol the sanya. Ezu Eretz Yisrael ve'ezu chutz la'aretz. So we'll say, what is considered to be the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, and what are the boundaries of chutz la'aretz? So we'll say, so I put out on the chat. So the Koren Gemara, the Steinsaltz Gemara, has a good image of these images. We're not really going to delve into the geography, but you could access the image a little bit to kind of get a better perspective as to what the Gemara is talking about. So I'll say, so watch this. Ezu Eretz Yisrael ve'ezu chutz la'aretz. What is Eretz Yisrael and what is chutz la'aretz? Kol sheshofea v'yoret miture Amnon v'lifnim Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, so essentially we look at Ture Amnon, right? The Amnon mountain range. And you could see, actually, I'll just let me pull it up over here as well. Good. So also you could see, if you're looking in the image that I sent out, so you could see over here, it's in the left-hand image where you see Ture Amnon. Ture Amnon. So also you could see it again all the way on the north of Eretz Yisrael. So there's a mountain range there, the Ture Amnon mountain range. So what are the borders of Eretz Yisrael? So from the Ture mountain, from the peaks of the Ture mountain, from the peaks of the Ture Amnon range and sloping inward, that's Eretz Yisrael. Kol sheshofeh v'yor miture Amnon v'livnim Eretz Yisrael, miture Amnon v'lachutz chutz la'aretz. But from the Ture Amnon range, and obviously from the peak, we'll call it sloping out. Ultimately, again, that is chutz la'aretz. Now that's the first part. Hanosin shebayam. I will say, what about islands? What about islands that are in the Mediterranean? Ultimately, again, are they parts of Eretz Yisrael or not? Roen osan kilu chut matuach alehem miture Amnon ad nachal Mitzrayim. We go ahead and we view, we'll say, an imaginary line from Ture Amnon till Nachal Mitzrayim. So we'll say that's the image there. You can look at it. You can see that dotted line that goes in the Mediterranean. Ultimately, again, that's the border. That's the border. So we'll say, so essentially you see what we're doing over here? We're just drawing a line between the two land borders of Eretz Yisrael. So Ture Amnon and Nachal Mitzrayim, and kind of anything within that line in the Mediterranean is Eretz Yisrael. Anything outside of that line is chutz la'aretz, is Medinas Hayam. So from the imaginary dotted line on the inside is Eretz Yisrael. So minachut v'lachutz chutz la'aretz. From the dotted line outside ultimately is going to be chutz la'aretz. Okay, so we'll say, so this is interesting. So therefore, what you see according to this approach is that halacha l'maisa, only the part of the Mediterranean that essentially is encompassed between the imaginary lines between the land borders is Eretz Yisrael. Anything outside of that area ultimately is going to be chutz la'aretz. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Huda, this is incredible. So Rabbi Huda Omer, kol shekeneged Eretz Yisrael, harehu ke'Eretz Yisrael. We'll say, so Rabbi Huda is actually of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, any part of the Mediterranean opposite Eretz Yisrael is like Eretz Yisrael. So I will say, just to show you what this means, take a look at Rashi. So Rashi is in the second wide line. Rabbi Huda, not of the widest lines, the intermediate lines. Rabbi Huda Omer, Kol hayam shekeneged avir shel Eretz Yisrael, va'afilu ad okainis lema'arav shu b'sof ha'olam, harik Eretz Yisrael. I will say, the entire Mediterranean Sea, opposite the land borders of Eretz Yisrael. He says, as far as the Atlantic Ocean, right, and that entire area ultimately belongs to Eretz Yisrael. He says, Shubasov Olam, Harikar Soshinemar, Yamagadol, Gvul Hai, Ugvul Kra Yiseru. So we'll say, so again. So we'll say, this is pretty dramatic. So we'll say, just want to point out just the differences of opinions over here. Right? Ultimately, again, so the first opinion saying that essentially we look at the land borders of Eretz Yisrael, the north-south borders, or the east-west borders. Right? So we have Ture Amnon, Nachal Mitzrayim, draw your imaginary line down there. Whatever part of the Mediterranean is encompassed in that, that's Eretz Yisrael. Outside of that land, that's not Eretz Yisrael. Who is saying, no. The border of Eretz Yisrael in the Mediterranean is the entire Mediterranean that runs opposite the land, the actual physical land of Eretz Yisrael, as far out as it goes. Rashi Gemara says, Shnei Amar, Ugvul Yam, V'haya lachem Hayam HaGadol, Ugvul Zeh Yeh lachem Gvul Yam. Incredible. So I'll say, so ultimately again, so he understands from the Pasuk in Bamidbar, Ugvul Yam, right, the boundary of the sea, V'haya lachem Hayam HaGadol, Ugvul Zeh Yulachem Gvul Yam. Now, what is the Gvul Yam? What is the boundary of the sea? The entire Mediterranean opposite the land borders of Eretz Yisrael. It's incredible. V'anosin Shebetz Dadin. Now, we'll say, now here's the difference. So remember that works. So essentially, therefore, any islands in that area will also be considered to be like Eretz Yisrael. Any islands on the side means they're in the Mediterranean, but they're not opposite the direct land borders of Eretz Yisrael. Rowan osan ki'ilu chut matuach aleim mi kafluria va'ad yam okainos omi nachal mitzrayim va'ad yam okainos. So I will say, same idea. What we're doing is we're now drawing this imaginary line. Minachut v'lifnim Eretz Yisrael. Ultimately, again, from the imaginary line on the inside is Eretz Yisrael. Minachut v'lachutz chutz la'aretz. Ultimately, again, from the imaginary line and outside is chutz la'aretz. So v'rabbanon, so we'll say. So I'll just point out, by the way, just here, so it's incredible. We'll say one of the big maritime disputes in current day geopolitics, right, is Israeli drilling for gas, right? Israel drilling for gas in the Mediterranean. So I'll say, just want to point out, it's a mefurish Gemara Maseches Gittin, right? Rabbi Yehuda holds it's ours, right? It's ours all the way until the Atlantic. As I'm just pointing out, again, it's always interesting to figure out like maritime rights in large bodies of water. And here you see just a dramatic machlokes. As I will say, according to the first opinion, there's really only a very small part of the Mediterranean that's considered to be Eretz Yisrael. It's going to be Eretz Yisrael. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's the entire Mediterranean opposite the land of Israel that is the boundary of Eretz Yisrael. So it's a pretty dramatic idea. So the Gemara goes back to Rabbanon, Hai Ugvul, my Avdiya. So what did the Rabbanon do with the pasuk of Rabbi Yehuda? Mibayle Linosin. Ultimately, I will say the Rabbanon use it to say that islands that are within the boundaries of the Mediterranean, ultimately, again, are parts of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda, Nosin lo tzrichi krag. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't need a pasuk for that. That's obvious. In other words, if the body of water is in the territorial area of Eretz Yisrael, then what? Certainly, any islands that are within that body of water are certainly part of Eretz Yisrael as well. Okay, incredible. So I just want to point out, the only reason this is coming up, right? It's always sometimes good, like to kind of trace our train of thought over here. So why is this here? This is all here because Hamevi get Besina, right? That's where we got into this. You're riding a get in a boat, right? Again, we assumed it was the waters of Eretz Yisrael. So I'll say, so now again, once that happened, we're trying to figure out what are the waters of Eretz Yisrael. Good. So I'll say, so just 2 points, really 2 points to ponder. Number one, everyone agrees that if you're riding a get on a boat in a landlocked river of Eretz Yisrael, then of course that is an Eretz Yisrael get. Therefore, b'fanei nechtam is no longer needed. So everyone also agrees that if you wrote a get on a boat in Chutz La'aretz and the boat comes into Eretz Yisrael, that's a Chutz La'aretz get, and therefore will require b'fanei nechtam. What's the machlokes case? You write a get essentially on a boat in the Mediterranean. That's our machlokes case. Rabbanan say as long as you're within the territorial borders of Eretz Yisrael, it's an Eretz Yisrael get. Rabbi Yehuda says you need gosheshas. You need to be coming up on land in that boat. And again, as we mentioned before, the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yehuda requires gosheshas. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Rabbi Meir Omer Akko Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, so listen, very interesting case. Now, Rabbi Meir says Akko is like Eretz Yisrael. Now remember, we had a machlokes in the Mishnah, right? Remember, the Mishnah outlined the borders of Eretz Yisrael for Gittin purposes. Remember, as we already saw in yesterday's daf, the borders for Eretz Yisrael for Gittin are not necessarily the territorial borders, ultimately, again, for Eretz Yisrael. For example, in yesterday's daf we saw that, in fact, there's a city of Kaziv, right? And Kaziv was even more north than Akko. In any event, what the Mishnah was telling us was that Allah for Gittin purposes, Akko is the northernmost border. The Rabban Tanakama held Akko itself was considered like Chutz La'aretz. Rabbi Meir held that Akko is considered to be like Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, watch this. Now we're going into a different topic based on this. Rabbi Meir, listen to this. Hamocher Avdol Surya. We'll say, what happens if a person goes ahead and sells his servant to Surya? Now we'll say, what's Surya? So Syria, right? In other words, a land north of Eretz Yisrael. A land north of Eretz Yisrael. Now, I will say, we're going to see why this is complicated in just a moment. Somebody sells his evet to Syria. Is that considered like a person has sold their evet to Chutz La'aretz or not? Now, I will say, what's going on over here? Take a look at Rashi. We'll see Rashi's 3 lines down into, actually, let's just do it like this. 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. Surya. He Aram Tsova. Surya is also known as Aram Tsova. The Kivsha David Vosif al Aritzran. I will say, here we go. David HaMelech conquered Surya. So I will say, so now, we're going to talk about this later on, but the conquering of Surya was called the Kibush Yachid. This was not a Milchemes Mitzvah. This was a war that David HaMelech decided to wage on his own. Right? Why did he decide to wage it on his own? To expand the territorial borders of Eretz Yisrael. That's why he did it. So we're going to say that there's a difference between a kibush rabim versus a kibush yachid, a war that is waged. Let's say again with the Sanhedrin, right? Because Baruch Hu commands us to go to war. Those types of war, and if we annex area, that area most definitely becomes part of Eretz Yisrael proper. The shaila is when you annex land based on kibush yachid, individual conquest, does that become part of actual territorial Eretz Yisrael? From like a Kedusha perspective as well. So this is the ongoing machlokes. So David HaMelech conquers Surya, Aram Sova, and he adds it on to Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, so now here's the Shaila. Rashi says, Kimocher kichutz la'aretz. Rashi says, Utran lekamon, hamocher avdo l'chutz la'aretz. We'll say, we're going to see something incredibly amazing. If you sell your servant, if you sell your servant to chutz la'aretz. So we'll say, imagine for a moment again, I have a servant, I have an eved, I sell him to Chutz La'aretz. What's the halacha? Yatz l'cheirus. We'll say we're going to see he immediately goes free. The kansinan lelokeach mishum de'eved shayich b'mitzvus va'asr lot seis mi eretz Yisrael l'chutz la'aretz. We'll say what a profound statement. So there's a penalty. You're not allowed to go ahead and sell your slave from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz, and if you do so, you're depriving him of the performance of certain mitzvos. The penalty for that is he goes free. That's the penalty. So we'll say again why that is, how that works. We're going to talk about it later sugya. But here's our shaila. What happens if I sell my eved? I live in Eretz Yisrael. I live in Eretz Yisrael. I sell my eved now to someone in Aram Tsov, in Syria. So we'll say again, what's Syria? Conquered by David HaMelech, annexed to Eretz Yisrael. So is that considered as if I have sold my evet to Chutz La'aretz or not? Samoch Avdol Surya, Kimocher b'Chutz La'aretz Dami Olo. Amar Lahu. Tuniso, we learned this, right? Meir Omer Akko Eretz Yisrael Gittin. And Meir said Akko is like Eretz Yisrael for Gittin. Gittin in La'avadim Lo. But so what do you see from here? That even according to Rabbi Meir, for all other matters, Akko was considered to be in Chutz La'aretz. Right? Even Rabbi Meir was only saying Akko is like Eretz Yisrael for Gittin. But certainly again for other matters, Akko was treated like Chutz La'aretz. The Choshekin Surya Demerach Ketuf. And the more so Surya, which Rabbi says what? Even more north than Akko. So it sounds like what the Gemara is saying over here is that Allah L'maisa, if even though Surya was annexed by David HaMelech, if one did sell their Eved from Eretz Yisrael to Surya, ultimately again that's the equivalent of saying to Chutz La'aretz, and the penalty would be that the Eved goes free. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right to say, now that we started talking about Surya, it's always exciting when the Gemara goes in these tangents. So Tanah Abanon, B'shlosha Drachim, Shavsa Surya L'Eretz Yisrael, U'B'shlosha L'Chutz La'aretz. So there are three ways in which Surya is like Eretz Yisrael, and 3 ways in which it is like Chutz La'aretz. So I will say, here we go. Afra Tamei Ki Chutz La'aretz. So number one, the earth of Surya is Tamei like Chutz La'aretz. So also we've seen this many times before. There is rabbinic tumah upon the earth of Chutz La'aretz. Right? What was that based on? A concern of unmarked graves. So there is rabbinic tumah on Chutz La'aretz. Right? You step foot into Chutz La'aretz, by definition you're tamei. So number one, the same way that the earth of Chutz La'aretz is tamei, Ultimately, again, the earth of Surya is tamei. V'amocher avdul Surya kimocher b'chul. Right? If you go ahead and you sell your servant to Surya, it's as if you went ahead and sold him to Chutz La'aretz. Therefore, what? He goes free. And lastly, hamevi get mi Surya kamevi michul. We'll say if you go ahead and you bring a get from Surya, that's bringing from Chutz La'aretz, from Medinas Hayam, and therefore, what do you have to do? What do you have to do? B'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. Good. So we'll say those are the three ways in which Surya is like Chutz La'aretz. U'b'shlosh Eretz Yisrael. But there are another three ways in which Surya is like Eretz Yisrael. How so? Number one, right? Chayeves b'maiser b'shvius. Eretz Yisrael is very interesting. In Surya, you are obligated to observe Shemitah and obligated to tithe. Very interesting. And I will say, obviously, it must be D'Rabbanan, right? It must be a D'Rabbanan, because obviously, if the first three things are true, in other words, that if halacha l'maisa, it's soil is tamei, and number two, you bring a get, ultimately, it's soil is tamei, you sell your servant there, he goes free. Ultimately, you bring a get there, that obviously means the midaraisa, it's chutz la'aretz. So when we say that it's chayv in shmita and trumas ma'asros, it must be D'Rabbanan. We'll talk about this. I will say this is inherently contradictory. It says literally, if you want to come in there, if you want to come into Surya in a state of ritual purity, you can. And I will say the reason why does that not seem to make that much sense? Because what did we just say before? That when you go into Surya, it's like entering into Chutz La'aretz. What happens after you enter into Chutz La'aretz? What happens? Tuma. Okay, so we'll discuss it in just a moment. Vakona b'Surya, kekona b'para'ari Yerushalayim. Right? And if you go ahead and you purchase ultimately again land in Surya, it's as if you are purchasing land in. I just realized I wanted to share something with you. Okay, if we have time. It's Ki'ilu, you are purchasing it in the provinces of Yerushalayim. Good. Okay, we'll come back to this in a moment. Fine. So we'll say three things, right? So three things. Allah Ma'isa. 3 ways. Let's go through this again. 3 ways in which Surya is not like Eretz. So number 1, its earth is tamei. Number 2, if you sell an evet to Surya, it goes free. Number 3, if you bring a get from Surya, say Fanachtam. 3 ways in which Surya is like Eretz Yisrael. Number 1, it's Chayiv in Meiser and Shemitah. Number 2, if you want to go in there in Tara, you can go there in Tara. Number 3, if you buy a field in Surya, that is the equivalent to buying a field in the provinces of Yerushalayim. Okay, so I'll say, now let's analyze. Here we go. So it says the Gemara. Let's go through the 3 in which it is like Eretz Yisrael. Chayeves b'Meiser u'b'Shvius. So I will say, ultimately, again, it's chayiv in meiser and shvius, right? Eretz Yisrael. Why? Kasavar, kibush yachid, shmei kibush. Ultimately, again, he holds, because this opinion holds that halacha l'maisa, the conquering of an individual, right? Kibush, I mentioned this before. Kibush yachid means that the conquering done by an individual, as opposed to by the nation, is still considered to be a legitimate conquering. Look at Rashi, kibush yachid, the David. Shalohayu kol Yisrael biyachad keder shayibikivush Yoshua. So we'll say this is an interesting distinction. So, for example, when Yoshua comes into Eretz Yisrael, right, beginning of Sefer Yoshua, and conquers the land, so we'll say that was a national endeavor. Not only did the entire nation participate, but remember again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved, the Navi's involved, right? The Kohen Gadol is involved. It's a national endeavor. So Rashi says over here, by Kibush, the Davish L'Hayel Kol Yisrael B'Yachad Keder Shei B'Kibush Yoshua Shehayu Kulam V'Kivshua L'Tzorech Kol Yisrael Kodim Chaluka. So remember again, by Yoshua, we'll say, why are they conquering the land? Because this is the very land that Am Yisrael is going to inhabit. Right? This is our primary national domicile. He says, Aval David lo kavish el litzarcho. Why did David HaMelech go ahead and do this? Why did he conquer Surya? Why? He wanted to. And everyone say, now again, remember, that's not an illegitimate reason. Just to point out, right, the king does have the power to wage wars. So again, if he wants to expand the territorial borders of Eretz Yisrael, either for security or for commerce, for taxes, for all. So again, that's a strategic decision that the king has the ability to make. Again, he can't go rogue. He still has to ask permission before going out to war. But Lamaisa, again, that's a strategic decision that he can make. But understand that when you conquer land for your own needs, so to speak, and not for Am Yisrael, it doesn't necessarily become Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, but let's take a step back. So obviously, if you're going to say that Allah Lamaisa, so that Surya is chayiv and Shumas Amaisrus, that must mean that Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush. That ultimately, again, the conquering of an individual is called conquering. Now, I want to point out something very interesting. Obviously, what they're saying when they say over here, Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush, it must mean Midrabanan, right? In other words, it can't be that like legitimately it's Eretz Yisrael. Because also remember again, if Surya is totally Eretz Yisrael, then what? Then Lamaisa, the first three can't be true. So what you really begin to see is in essence, Kibush Yachid Lo Shmei Kibush. Oh, well actually, let's finish this first. We'll come back to this in just a moment. So I'll say, in any event, the point is, the conquering of an individual at least endows the area with some level of Eretz Yisrael identity. Therefore, it's going to be Chayv and Shumas Amaisrus. Next, V'arotza likanis labetayra nichnas. We'll say Chesem Lebeis 8b, 3 lines down. If a person wants to enter into Surya in a state of Tara, they have the ability to do so. So the Gemara notes the inherent contradiction. How does that work? Va'amrit afratame. But you just said before that what? You just said before that the earth of Surya is tamei, just like the earth of Chutz La'aretz, of Medinas Hayam. So I don't understand. How does that stem? You said before, if you walk into Surya, you become tamei midrabanan, and now you're saying that if you want to enter in there in a state of Tara, you can do so. To which the Gemara says it's not a problem. Beshida, Teva, Umigdal. So this is very interesting. You can enter in, literally was a Shida, Teva, Umigdal. Ultimately means like a cabinet, a trunk, or a closet. In other words, that if you enter into Surya in a box, right, essentially in a box, right? So now, by the way, it's not so crazy. If you're just in a wagon, right, or an airplane, right? So in other words, right, you enter in a box, then Allah say you don't contract Tumah. Now I'll say, now watch this. This Sanya is fascinating. Hanichnas, Rashi points out over here, Beshida Teva Umigdal, V'nosim Osa Ba'avir. I'm being transported in the airspace of Chutz La'aretz, or I should say of Surya, and ultimately again not on the ground. Desanya, but listen to this. Desanya, Hanichnas La'eretz Ha'amim. If one goes ahead and enters into Chutz La'aretz, Beshida Teva Umigdal, even in a box, right in a box, Rebbe Mitame. Rebbe says I'm Tameh. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Matar. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that I'm tar. Rabbi Yossi, now watch this. Rebbe says I'm Tameh. Why? Because Avir, because ultimately airspace of Chutz La'aretz also is Matame. What about the fact that effectively I'm in an ohel, right? I'm in a structure. Rebbe holds ohel zrok lo shmei ohel. Rebbe holds that a movable structure is not considered to be a barrier. It's not considered to be a legitimate halach structure. Rashi says this over here. Rebbe Matame kasavar ohel zrok lo shmei ohel. He holds that literally a movable tent is not considered to be a tent, i.e., is not a barrier. Say for Rabbi say, watch this. So now I'm being transported. Let's say in a there's no good case over here, right? Like a wagon in a box, right? So the mice again, Rebbe will say that I become tamei as soon as I enter into Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because in Chutz La'aretz, even the airspace is metame. A movable ohel is not considered to be a proper structure so as to serve as a barrier to tumah. Now watch this. So the Gemara says, "Va'afilu Rebbe lo kamatame be'eretz ha'amim." Now even Rebbe will hold that this is only a problem in Chutz La'aretz proper. The gazru al gusha the al avira, because we're both saying Chutz La'aretz, the rabbinic tumah is both on the earth as well as what? On the airspace. Aval surah al gusha gazru al avira lo gazru. It's fascinating. So on Surya, right, on Surya and on Silva, Chazal only were gozer on the earth, not on the airspace. Not on the airspace. So I'll say, so absolutely fascinating. So therefore on Surya halacha l'maisa, again, That's what it means, by the way, when it's now I can reconcile the two. So in the first part, when it was saying how Surya is different from Eretz Yisrael, so if you go into Surya and you walk on the ground of Eretz Surya, what's the halacha? You are rabbinically tamei. But what about in the second three things, where I was comparing it to Eretz Yisrael? So one of the ways in which I compare it is what? That you could enter it in Tara. So I understand, how can you enter into Surya without contracting Tumah? How can you do that? Don't step foot on the ground. Enter into the airspace. If you enter into the airspace, so if you are transported in a box, ultimately again, and not on the ground, halacha l'maisa, you would not contract tumah. Fascinating. But we'll say, look at this last one. Vakones sada b'Surya, kekona b'para'ari Yushalayim. So this is interesting. And if you buy a field in Surya, it's as if you're going ahead and buying it in the provinces of Yushalayim. What does this mean? People say, this is fascinating. What exactly is the ramification of that? Get ready for this. Amar Sheshes Lomar Shekosvin Alav Ono Vafilu b'Shabbos. I will say what it means is you can write a document of sale for it even on Shabbos. Wow! That if you want to buy land in Surya, right, and there is a deal to be made, you could even write that document on Shabbos. Why? I will say why? Because buying land in Surya is like buying land in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says the Shabbos. Really? You're allowed to write up a document to purchase land in other words, even if Surya is like Eretz Yisrael, you're allowed to go ahead and write up a document to purchase land in Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos. Kedam Rabba says, Kedam Rabba, Omer la'ovid kochavim va'oseh. Oh, let's say, what's the case? You could instruct a non-Jew to write up a document of sale to purchase land in Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos. Halchanami, Omer la'ovid kochavim va'oseh. So what's what the Gemara is saying is like this. If there is this is actually a fascinating halacha, but essentially what the Gemara is saying is like this. If there is land to be had, right? You have the opportunity to buy land in Eretz Yisrael. And there is a significant concern that if you wait until after Shabbos, that land is not going to be there. You can go ahead and ask a non-Jew to go ahead and draft a bill of sale on your behalf in order to seal that deal. What the Gemara says over here is the same way that applies to quote-unquote the provinces of Yerushalayim, it applies to Surya as well, telling me that Surya is in fact part of Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara said, but one second, I will say, but one second, it's telling a non-Jew, right? We did this extensively in Smichas Chaver, instructing a non-Jew to do malacha, we'll say, is a shvus. We'll say, what does it mean, a shvus? A d'Rabbanan. Right, midoraisa on a biblical level, I, the Jew, can't do malacha. Right, midoraisa, can I instruct a non-Jew to do malacha on my behalf? Midoraisa, yeah. Chazal said, no, you can't. You can't ask a non-Jew, you can't ask a Gentile to do malacha for you. Anything you can't do yourself on Shabbos, you can't instruct a non-Jew to do on Shabbos. So one second, how could I instruct a non-Jew to write up this document? So the Gemara says, Mishum Yishuv Eretz Yisrael Lo Gaz Rabbanon. What did Gemara say? So remember again, instructing a non-Jew to do malacha is an Isser D'Rabbanan, a rabbinic prohibition. So essentially what Chazal said is for the sake of inhabiting the land of Israel. Ultimately, again, they were not gozer in this case. So when it comes to Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, when it comes to inhabiting Eretz Yisrael, purchasing land in Eretz Yisrael, ultimately, again, the rabbinic prohibition of instructing a non-Jew to do malacha does not apply. And therefore, again, I will say, if there's an opportunity to buy land in Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos, I can actively instruct a non-Jew to write up that bill of sale. This is all assuming it can't wait till after Shabbos. And the Gemara says in the same way that ultimately, again, you could do that in Eretz Yisrael, you could also go ahead and do that in Surya, which tells me what there was, which tells me that halacha l'maisa, Surya is part of Eretz Yisrael. So I will say, there is a beautiful, beautiful idea that I saw brought down in the name, I forgot just to print it out, in the Likutei Imrei Chaim, the Vishnitzer Rebbe. And the Vishnitzer Rebbe says, so I'll say, so many opinions, well, we're not getting into the halacha l'maisa right here, but many opinions, the fundamental machlokes is, do we say kibush yachid shmei kibush or lo shmei kibush? Ultimately, again, kibush yachid means the conquering of an individual. Does it go ahead? Is that called conquering or not? So listen to the words of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, so we'll say, so the majority of poskim actually paskin, kibush yachid, lo shmei kibush. Conquering of an individual or by an individual, ultimately again is not called conquering. So the Rebbe says something so beautiful. He says, Mi shekovesh umashtim rak es atzmo. A person who only spends his life conquering himself, just working on himself. But he doesn't go ahead. But he doesn't what? And I will say, he doesn't pay attention to helping his family, or he doesn't pay attention to helping his neighbor, or to helping his community, or helping his people. Ultimately, again, lo shmei kibush. That's not called conquering. That's not called conquering, I will say. If my whole life is kibush yachid, if all I'm doing in life ultimately, again, is just focusing on myself, bless you. Yeah, focusing on my own growth, but all I'm doing is focusing on me, and I'm not figuring out how to make a difference in the lives of those around me, lo shmei kibush. That doesn't create Kedusha. That doesn't really go ahead. That's not called conquering. Real kibush, Rabbi say, is when you do kibush, when you conquer on behalf of the klal. You do what's good for you, you build yourself, but you also take the time to build those around you. Incredible yisod. We'll say one more, the yisod brought down. Sorry, I should have brought this out. This is by the Slam Rebbe. So Slam Rebbe says, I will say, that if you notice, the Gemara gives an interesting eitzah for entering into Eretz Ha'amim, and ultimately, again, not contracting Tumah. What's the only way to enter into Eretz Ha'amim and not contract Tumah? In a box. So Slam Rebbe says, you see from here, that in life, it is impossible to avoid entering into impure circumstances. Everyone does. Everyone does, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's whatever, it could be a whole bunch of different things. So Islam Rebbe says, what do you have to do? Build your box. Build your box. Make sure to set up your walls. Make sure to set up your gidarim. Life is all about setting up your protective fences. And life is about all about identifying, the lines that I'm not going to cross. What are the things I do? What are the things I don't do? Inevitably, over the course of life, everyone has to enter into Eretz Ha'amim. But if you build your box, if you build your gidarim, if you build your personal strictures and the lines you will not cross, then you will be able to operate in Eretz Ha'amim without contracting the Tumah. An incredible, incredible idea. Let's go weiter. We have another minute. Says the Gemara, Tana Abanan, Eved, Shehevi Gito, this is another interesting case. V'kasu ba'atzmech unachasai kinuyin lecha. So I'll say, watch this. So I'll say, so now we're transitioning over here to a different case. So I'll say, so now we're going to talk about, there's a parallel case of an Eved who brings his document of emancipation, right? An Eved, in order to leave servitude, requires a get shikhr, a document of emancipation. We're going to see that, interestingly enough, a get shikhr, right, and a get, like a divorce get, share many common features. So if an Eved goes ahead and brings his get, right, Eved Shevi Gito, an Eved brings his get, and Kasabon, it says in that get, Atzmich, you Eved, unechasai, and my property, kinuyin lecha, are acquired to you. Atzmo kana, nechasam lo kana. Ultimately, again, he acquires himself, but he does not acquire the property. Also, take a look at Rashi. Evet shehevi gito. Rashi says, "Mimdina sayam v'tzarech lomar b'far nechtav kiisha." So we're going to see. We'll get this tomorrow's daf. But Lamais, we're going to see that when an Eved brings his get shikhr from Medina Sayam, he has to say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam, which indicates us that what we call a get shikhr, a document of emancipation, must be written l'shma. So he's bringing his get from Medina Sayam. And what happens? In the get itself, it's written, Eved, acquire yourself and acquire your property. What's the halacha? The Gemara says, Atzmo kana, he acquires himself, but he has not acquired the property. And Rashi points out over here, he acquires himself because he is believed to say b'fanei nechtav or b'fanei nechtam, but he does not acquire the property. Why doesn't he acquire the property? Because halacha l'maisa will say the property is now just a regular transaction, and that requires regular kiyum shtaros. And he is not enough to establish regular kiyum shtaros. So it's fascinating. For himself, he's believed. For the property, he's not believed. All right, so we're going to stop over here for today. We'll let me pick up at these 2 dots tomorrow. Shkoyach. Incredible. Incredible, incredible. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Good to see what a strong Eretz Yisrael contingent we have today. Mamish, beautiful, beautiful. Shiach's coming. More people on Zoom from Eretz Yisrael than from Chutz La'aretz. All right, so I'm going to take the sign. Take the sign. There you go. Good morning. Say that again. Yeah, just bepashtas, he's going